back. Josh Hardy here with Jason on Hardy Brothers Outdoors, episode 2 in our purchasing, what do we call it?
Recreational
property. So we're talking about our tips and tricks. In the last episode, we talked about finding the property and some things that went into our decision criteria and our experience. In this one, we want to talk a little bit about budget and finance. And I'm going to hit budget real quick before we jump into finance, just because it's could have been part of the first one, which is, buy within your means, and, setting your budget, understanding your budget certainly also impacts what you choose and where you look. Are you going to be on a lake? Are you going to be on a river? Are you going to be, out in the middle of a field? What is it that you're looking for, but what can you afford? And I think from the finance aspect, what we want to also kind of hit here is your budget can be impacted by your approach to buying. And we'll talk about a few ways that we've seen that in our own experience. So,
yeah, I think that's great. One of the things in terms of budget that I've heard when listening to others talk about, how to buy land is, don't think too narrowly in terms of what you can afford, because with some creative financing, with leveraging the property, if there's timber on it, there's ways you can take money out of the property right after you buy that might help you afford more than you think. At the same time, it's important to, really think through that budget, because you can spend a lot of time looking at property that you're never going to be able to afford. And it's a waste of your time, it's a waste of the realtor's time, it's a waste of the seller's time. And having a good understanding of, what's in the ballpark is good. And, from a budget standpoint, think about, this doesn't necessarily have to be your forever piece of land. When I bought my 25 acres, I viewed it as, this is it. I'm buying this and I'll own it forever. And that was my absolute intent. At this point, I'm questioning, am I going to continue to keep that property, or will I buy more property here that's local to Josh? So we've mentioned he's got the 70 acres, we've got the 80 acres together, and I spend the majority of my time here. So it doesn't have to be a forever decision. It can be, what's in my budget today? I want to buy 25 acres. My ultimate goal is to own 100, and therefore I need to do this deal right so that when I sell it, I've got money to put into that next property. So from a budget standpoint, that would be, some additional information.
Yeah, budget in finance and how you buy. How much money do I need for my down payment? If you're buying land, at the time that I was buying, which was about 6.5 years ago, the market hadn't been good. The banks were very stringent, and they were requiring 35% down on a land-only purchase. So if you were just buying land, 35%. Now, if that land had a house or a structure, and it was all part of the deal, then you would buy it like a typical mortgage. I actually bought a house with 5 acres and then 70 acres that surrounded it. 2 separate transactions handled differently. So the house we financed through the bank and did the typical approach. I think I actually did what's called an 80-10-10, which we won't go into too many details here, but 10% down, a 10% equity loan, and an 80% loan. And it's actually kind of a creative financing approach that, ask your banker about it. Do they do 80-10-10s? We had used it previously in some real estate purchases back home for rental properties, and it allowed us to get into multiple properties at 10% down. So that was what we did on the house. On the other piece of the property, which was a separate buyer, a separate family member, and we had a fantastic experience in that. The gentleman's a good friend of ours now. But going through that process, I spent a lot of time kind of understanding what his wants and needs were. And one of his wants were more higher price per acre than what I thought the market value was or what I was willing to spend. But I was also looking for owner financing. And so I started to discuss with him, well, what if I could come to a price that when you add interest to it, you will get more in the long term, closer to the price that you'd like to get, but it isn't supported by market value. And so we ran some numbers and some scenarios and came up with a workable solution. We had a relatively competitive interest rate of 4% at the time. It was pretty good interest rate for him. He wasn't making 4% on savings, and he was at a time in his life where he's not doing aggressive investments, but more kind of conservative. So 4% was a good return. Got him more total price on our total outcome on the sale. For me, I was able to put down, I think I put down 20% instead of 30 or 35, whatever the bank wanted. So it was good for me. I didn't have to have as much cash up front. And we made a number of agreements to make sure that through that transaction, he was protected and I was protected. So he actually held the note just like a bank would on that deal, and it turned out to be, I think, mutually beneficial.
Yeah, I used owner financing on my property in West Virginia, and went into it with the attitude that if I needed to go to the bank, I could. I had money for a down payment, but if not, I would look to finance through him. And we came to an agreement that I gave him a upfront payment, and then we made arrangements for twice a year payments for the next 5 years. So we took the balance. We didn't really calculate any kind of interest rate. We just said, here's what I owe you. We're going to divide it up into 10 payments that are twice a year, and you're going to send me a payment each time. And after 5 years, it'll be paid off. This was a gentleman. He was in his late 60s. He was, I think he was working part-time. He was officially retired, and he didn't need necessarily all that money to live on. So he got a nice chunk up front, and then he got this payment every 6 months. So it worked out well for both of us. I ended up actually paying it off a little bit early. It didn't cost him anything for me to do it early. I reached out to him, asked him, hey, I've got some extra money. Do you care if I make an extra payment, just get this off the books for myself? And it did. As far as I was concerned, the way it worked out, first of all, I never, at that point in my life, I really never imagined owning a piece of property like that. And it was somewhat shocking to me as I did it that it came together and it was so easy. And I remember telling some family members that, if I can find that model from others, I would buy more land over and over and over. That it was just such a good deal for me and for him. I wasn't hung up on a big payment. I was very comfortable with the arrangement, and I felt like I was getting a good deal and he was getting a good deal. And any time that the seller's winning and you're winning, it's probably a pretty good model. So the owner financing is certainly an angle that there's a lot of people will tell you flat out, I'm not doing that. And I tried to buy more land down there from a neighbor, and he said, nope, I don't want to be in the middle of that. But there's others that will do it, and it's worth having the conversation.
Yeah, so we'll just touch a little bit maybe on some of that risk mitigation because my seller had some concerns. He was turning over the property to me, and there's a potential that I could come in here and clear cut the timber, degrade the value, and then default on the loan. He gets the property back, but I just took a huge portion of the value off the property. Also, with the 4-acre pond, the price per acre on a pond is more valuable than a price of open field or whatever. And he was basically saying, hey, if you breach that dam and drain that pond, then that reduces the value of the property too. And so I had to kind of understand it from his eyes, which is, hey, I'm taking a risk by loaning you money, and I want to be protected. The banks are big, heavy-handed. They can come in and repossess your property. They've got the lawyers and whatever else. But as an individual, I needed to understand his concerns and help mitigate those to create that win-win. And so together, and again, this gentleman and I are great friends now, and enjoy spending time together and talking about the different things that we're going to do with the property. Still being adjacent, he owns some property still next door. But we wrote in that we were going to. I was only able to do select cut and do forestry best practices. So I had to have a registered forester, which was fine with me. I didn't want to go in and rape the land and take all the trees and anything. I wanted to improve it, not degrade it. So we actually went together on our timber sale and worked together so that, which actually benefited me more than him because he has more acreage, and I probably wouldn't have gotten a timber company as interested in my timber if they weren't taking his as well. On the pond, we wrote into the contract as well that I could breach it for the purposes of dredging or maintenance, but otherwise, the pond was responsibility of me to keep it there. So I was fine with those things, and it made him feel better. He knew that if I defaulted on the loan, he got it all back. So it doesn't matter if it's the last payment or the third payment. If you default on the loan, he still owns the ground. The fact that he holds the lien on the property. I own the deed, but he has a lien against the property. So
yeah, and what Josh, when he says he gets the property back, he gets it back, and he has the assurances that it's still valuable. It's no different than when you finance a car and you're required to have full coverage on that car. The bank doesn't want you to total a car that's not insured, and that's basically what he was asking for. So it's a great model to protect him, and for the most part, it should be pretty reasonable in terms of you can negotiate that with him to match up with your needs. So both the examples that we talked about, why they were structured slightly different, are really no different than a mortgage from a bank. So Josh had a mortgage with that owner. He had a down payment, he had an interest rate, and he had a monthly payment. I had a down payment on my property, I had a 0% interest rate, and I had a payment that I had to make. So that is, it's a very standard model. Other models that you hear people talk about, you hear this more in terms of houses, rent to own, or there's all kinds of things you can rent to own, right? Land contract. There are various models out there for purchasing. And we talked about how much detail we wanted to get into on this because neither one of us is an expert. There's a lot of ins and outs of each of them. But one thing that I would suggest is when you're talking to somebody, be careful about what terminology you use, because I've heard a lot of people make the comment, I'm not doing a land contract as a seller or a buyer. And there are pluses and minuses to the different models for everybody. But if you're throwing around a term that maybe you're misusing, you could potentially damage the ability for you to come to an agreement with that person. So if you come to them and say, hey, I'd like to do a land contract, do you really want a land contract, or do you want him to loan you the money like a mortgage because you think he's willing to do it and a bank may not be willing to do that? So be careful with the terminology you use. There's so many models, and you can really be creative with how you buy.
Well, let me jump in for just a second, because land contract. Am I getting a contract on the land, a real estate contract on the land, or am I getting a land contract? Land contract is like a rent to own. So, you don't make your payment, they come take back your television and your couch that you had on rent to own, right? That is, you don't own it, you're using it. A mortgage contract on a piece of real estate means you get the deed, that is yours. And at the point that you don't pay for it, there's a process to come back and recoup it. So to Jason's point, look up the difference between a land contract and a mortgage. Honestly, hire a lawyer. I know a lot of people want to save money. We're going to do, let's just talk about a couple gotchas that we've seen. We're trying to figure out whether we do this as a separate one or not. But, get a lawyer or a real estate agent and make sure that you work with a title company to close, because those are the things that are there to protect you. And I looked at a number of properties before I got to this one. The seller here was very honest, more so than what I've been told by the people that I worked with. That doesn't happen all the time down in this county, right? There's things that can get not disclosed or whatever that maybe in a big city would be different. But, check to make sure there aren't any liens on the property. Check to make sure you understand all the easements and right-of-ways. Who has access to portions of your property that, you may think you have? I've heard horror stories of people saying between the time that I got into contract with the seller and the time that I closed, he timbered it. But he already had the timber plan in place to come be done, but we didn't discuss the timber. Or he quick claimed a access for the neighbor, a quick claim being a very short path to a deed to give them access right away to their property that they had always been using, but it wasn't disclosed or you hadn't asked the question. So there's a lot of things that kind of do the research. Peel back the onion a little bit, peel back the covers a little bit, and make sure that you understand what's going on with the piece of property you're going to own.
Yeah, the agreement I came to with the individual in West Virginia, it was something. I went and met with him. We had a quick conversation. It was a handshake deal. I gave him a check for a small deposit, but we immediately went to a title company and we had them do the title search, the legal work. It was all buttoned up, and when we put it together, both of us knew we'd been protected and that it was going to work. When we bought the 80 acres, the individual we bought it from together, he was an attorney. We had both been through some purchases, so we had a purchase model in mind, and I think we structured a lot of that deal. Him being an attorney, we were able to structure it. He was able to review it and made the tweaks that he wanted to make himself comfortable.
Still used a local.
Yeah, we used
lawyer.
a local company a local lawyer that I don't think represented both of us, but helped us with the closing.
Yeah.
And but it was another case of just working with the owner and creating a situation that worked well. One of the things that we put in there were mineral rights on the property, or are mineral rights on the property. He owned 100% of them. He'd owned the property for 30, 40, 50 years. And I think Josh mentioned in our first series, talked about some of what's happening in terms of fracking and in more eastern Ohio. But one of his questions was, I want to keep the mineral rights because what if I've been paying taxes for years, and what if suddenly there's value to these minerals? And we came back and said, we don't want property that we don't own the mineral rights to. And we came to an agreement that we would split the mineral rights for 5 years, and at the end of 5 years, they would all come to us. So there's just so much creativity that you can put into these contracts so that you meet your needs and the seller's needs. You can certainly try, we found our properties without, Josh found the house with a realtor, but found the adjacent property by talking to the owner. There's just so many models for how you can do it on your own, how you can use a realtor, and just leverage a number of resources to help bring those deals together.
Yep. So I think we're straying from our financing and budget, because I want to talk about other stuff that related to the mineral rights that I'm gonna maybe save for another video. We've got more coming, so hit that like and subscribe. Hit that bell notification so you know when we put out another video. And we're going to continue this series until we've kind of exhausted the topics. Let us know in the comments what your experience has been, or if you're in the market and if you've got questions. Again, we're not experts, but between the two of us, over the course of our lifetime, we've probably purchased 8 to 10 to 12 properties between the two of us, rental properties, primary homes,
Yep.
and 3 pieces of recreational property. So we have experience, and if nothing else, we might give you some questions to go ask and vet. So thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time. And remember to get outdoors, because outdoors is always in season. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.